The saloon was the heart of the Wild West. It was a microcosm of life on the American frontier, housing crooks and lawmen, politicians, full of fun and fighting, drinking, sex, and everything in between. The American frontier existed on the fringes of American society, a land of relative lawlessness and constant danger, whether from native warbands or outlaws and bandits. The lands of the frontier attracted many people seeking to make a life for themselves. Away from the developed, polite society of the already settled eastern United States, the Wild West was notorious for violence, gambling, duels, prostitution, crime, and bounty hunting, catering to some of the most dangerous individuals. Life in the West was harsh and unpredictable. Perhaps the most recognizable symbol of the Wild West is the saloon. These saloons were all-around dens of iniquity and catered to all aspects of society. As lawmen, politicians, and soldiers drank side by side with outlaws, fur trappers, and gamblers. Many forms of entertainment existed in these saloons, some more innocent than others. The most common form, and the very reason for the saloon's existence, was alcohol.
Damn it, no!
In their early days, following the settlement of a new era, saloons served little more than homemade whiskey, which was both cheap and strong. As the settlements grew, so did the saloons, with many drinks becoming available. Along with hard spirits, beers were also readily available and very popular. People were aware of the potential dangers of badly distilled spirits, which could result in stomach problems or even blindness. And so mixed drinks were also somewhat common for those saloons that could not afford to import it, as this was believed to lessen the risk of rot gut. Though contrasting with the popular image of the Wild West, wine was also very popular, both red and white, usually served in cocktails. Men could also enjoy casual parlor games such as billiards, indoor bowling, or darts. Games of strength and skill were also common, such as knife throwing or arm wrestling. These were often more than just games, as reputation meant everything in the Wild West. And a reputation as a skilled knife thrower or arm wrestler could result in prestige. This prestige could be used to earn money, as others searching for fame challenged them, usually for money. For some, however, a reputation could be the last thing they wanted. Some hustlers made their money from their lack of reputation, as they posed as unskilled players, luring in unsuspecting victims who thought they could make some quick, easy money. Upon a bet being placed, the hustler would drop their act, soundly beating their opponent.
Where'd you learn to shoot like this?
7-Eleven.
This profession necessitated travel, as those in one town eventually became aware of the con, and so most of those hustlers were drifters, traveling from one settlement to another. Gambling. Those with money to lose, or wishing to make some, could gamble freely. Many gamblers in the West were professionals who ran card games banked with their own money. These men, viewed as respectable businessmen by most, were renowned for their fairness. They paid the relevant licensing fees, penalized cheating, and paid what they owed. But perhaps the more well-known figure is that of the grifter, the cheat, who uses weighted dice or modified cards. These cheats and hustlers existed in every Wild West town with a saloon or gambling hall, often preying on travelers passing through, who were yet to learn of their reputation. Violence was relatively common among the gamblers. Many men carried small pistols, easily concealed and drawn, as well as small daggers hidden in a boot, which eventually took on the name of gambler's knives. The violence could come from both the cheater and the cheated, as men tried to shoot or stab their way out of a bad loss, or tried to force the other man to cough up. In one instance, a group of local vigilantes formed to fight back against the cheats who plagued their town, capturing and lynching 5 of them. Ladies of the night. There were plenty of options for those who wished to spend their money in different ways. Prostitution was widespread in the Wild West and accepted as a part of life by many. Many saloons hired dancers who provided entertainment and companionship. One of their jobs was to talk and drink with customers who bought drinks for themselves and their new companions. The drinks served to the women, who were saloon employees, were often watered down, keeping the women from getting drunk on the job. but allowing them to sit with many men all night long. Along with innocent entertainment, these women almost always doubled as prostitutes, and were known colloquially as painted girls, sporting women, or ladies of the line. While possibly well-paying, the job was not without its risks, and they were often victims of violence, sometimes extreme. The most notorious case is that of Jewel Boulette, a prostitution from Virginia City, Nevada. She was discovered dead in her room, having been beaten and strangled to death by a French drifter. Those who managed to avoid death or serious injury rarely escaped the business intact. With age, they became less desirable, until they were eventually forced out of the job. With their reputation as ladies of the night, they were unlikely to find a husband, and many died long before old age, after suffering from destitution, alcoholism, syphilis, or suicide. Knives and duels. Those wishing for an evening's entertainment but unwilling to pay for it could always brawl instead. Hand-to-hand fights were a natural part of saloon life, and almost anything could be a good excuse to have one. These fights were not honorable, organized affairs. There were rarely any rules in these barroom brawls, and people, including innocent bystanders, could end up seriously injured, or even dead. Weapons were often used, with the most iconic being the Bowie knife. This knife, designed for both fighting and working, was invented by American pioneer Jim Bowie, and the design eventually spread all across the country. These were nothing like the small daggers concealed in the gambler's boots. These knives were more akin to short swords, with blades as long as 20 or 30 centimeters, with a 4 or 5 centimeter blade width. These weapons could inflict serious damage and claimed many lives on the American frontier. Also in relatively widespread use were knuckle dusters, or brass knuckles. These were made very popular during the American Civil War. Many soldiers purchased professionally made cast iron or brass knuckles, while many soldiers on campaign made their crude versions, creating a casting mold in the earth and filling it with molten lead made from melted bullets. Those fighting with nothing but their own hands were not necessarily any less dangerous. Though becoming less popular at the time of the Wild West, rough and tumble fighting was still somewhat popular. These fights were usually organized duels with a set date, location, and time. These duels were incredibly gruesome, as the aim was to seriously disfigure your opponent, using your hands, fingers, and teeth. The most common tactic was to gouge out your opponent's eyes, and the best fighters could do this within seconds, with nothing more than a quick thrust of the thumb. The practice of a rough and tumble began to die down in the mid-19th century as ownership of revolvers became more prevalent. These new high-tech weapons changed both the face of warfare and criminality. These weapons gave men 6 shots in quick succession, much more deadly than the muzzle-loaded pistols that came before, which could only fire 1 shot before requiring a lengthy loading process. The prevalence of these weapons resulted in an entire subculture of gunfighters or gunslingers, renowned for their skills with the revolver. These men could be notorious criminals such as Billy the Kid or well-respected lawmen like Wyatt Earp. Anyone could become a gunslinger, granted they had the nerve and the skill, no matter their profession. John Henry Holliday, popularly known as Doc Holliday, was a dentist by profession, but also one of the most well-known and well-respected gamblers and gunfighters, all while suffering from tuberculosis. He ended up joining Wyatt Earp in the search for the Cochise County Cowboys, a gang of cattle rustlers and horse thieves, cementing his place in American history and popular culture, along with Earp at the famous gunfight at the OK Corral in 1881. The gunfight between Wild Bill Hickok and Davis Tutt is not only a tale of a typical Western gunfight, but an illustration of life in the Wild West as a whole. Following the Civil War, Tutt, who fought as a Confederate, had traveled to Springfield, Missouri in search of a better life, while Hickok, a former Union soldier, came to the area as a drifter after thinking he had killed a man in a bar fight. The two were skilled gamblers and friends until a dispute over a woman occurred. Tutt refused to play cards with Hickok, but coached other players in how to cheat in an attempt to bankrupt Hickok. In a card game between Hickok and another gambler, Tutt stood nearby, lending Hickok's opponent money to keep him in the game. Tutt demanded Hickok pay him for an outstanding debt, but Hickok refused until the situation came to a head and Tutt safe surrounded by his armed associates, snatched Hickok's walk from the table. Hickok's refusal to pay made him appear as if he had no money, which could have meant the death of his gambling career, his only source of income. Tut left with the watch, and Hickok went upstairs to clean and load his pistols. The following day, the two met in the town square, with Tut now demanding more money. It looked like it was nothing more than a boast by both of them, as they retired for a drink, but they returned to the square later that evening. Hickok gave Tut one final chance to avoid the duel, but he refused. Tut faced Hickok and placed his hand on his pistol, still in its holster. Tut drew his pistol, and so did Hickok. Both men fired a single shot, but only Hickok's was on target, hitting Tut in the chest. Tut's final words were, "Boys, I'm killed." Hickok was arrested and charged with murder. After a lengthy trial, his defense of self-defense was accepted, and Tut taunting Hickok with the stolen watch was seen as justifiable provocation for resorting to firearms.